Hi everybody, welcome back to our Tuesday tips. Now I know in the previous one I showed you how to do the flat locking, and I know that in my mind I was thinking you're going to say, where am I going to use it? Because this is really a beautiful stitch to work with. So having a long weekend, I decided to actually make myself a pattern. Usually I design my own patterns, but I've been sitting with this Marcy Tilton pattern for quite a while, and I just pulled it out and I thought, let's look at what I've got in my stash. So this is the result of it. Looking at when I constructed it, I specifically on the lines, the style lines, because we've got princess lines at the back. I'll show you now. It's also got a beautiful line. It's got like a little peplum at the back. I wanted it to stand out more, and especially with this fabric, this is there's no other word. This is a busy fabric. And when I started pinning it and I looked at it and I thought, no, this is too busy. So I wanted to actually bring out the style line, but also break the pattern a little bit. That was my mind between all of this. And because we did the flat locking, I thought, let's just flat lock this pattern or this garment. And that's what I ended up doing. And I must tell you, I am loving it. It actually, the flat locking made this garment. If I had to just go and sew it normally, I can tell you now, it would not have had the same impact for me as what I've got now. Now, if we look at the princess line, I've just done it. I didn't even do decorative thread. I did my normal polyester. I used Ceylon. I did polyester thread, and I chose the white flat lock stitch because I wanted to show the width of the stitch. And I went ahead and I've got to pick her up just now to show you. And this is just a hoodie. I've still got to do my buttons and my buttonholes. And with the busy pattern as well, I didn't want just a plain, I'm going to show you the buttons on the picture now. I didn't want a plain button. I actually got one that's showing a bit of that purpley, and it's also got a bit of a grain effect almost to it. So if you look at the photo there, you can see my choice of my buttons that I've done. And so I've just got to do that, then my garment is finished. So I cannot wait to wear it. I'm already imagining making white denims with it. Now I need a skirt with it. You know, my mind is already going, what am I going to do with it to just bring out this color as well. I did on all these lines, I did my flat locking. I decided to do, I'm just going to pick her up. I can't turn her, but I even took the flat locking, all my panel pieces are flat locked together. That's all I did. Didn't go to the sewing machine. And I ended up doing the sleeve as well, because I thought, if you look at it, just to have that line flowing. I didn't sew it closed from there to there. I actually closed the side seam, and then I did a normal inset sleeve that I've worked with. And now look at the back. Look how it's just breaking the pattern for me. With this busy fabric, I think if I didn't do the flat locking, I would not have liked this it's actually, they say it's a cardigan. I would not have liked the cardigan. This really just gave me the detail that I needed. And the other thing also with this specific pattern, she wants to do binding, a lot of binding on the inside. Sorry, she's so heavy and she won't swivel. I've got to pick her up and actually just turn her a little bit. So what happened now with this, with specifically this fabric as well, as I said, for the pattern, she says you can bind the seams and all that, which I didn't want to do. And working with this fabric, it didn't give me a nice edge if I just overlocked it, and it's quite bulky. So with the flat locking and having the ladder stitch on the inside, I'm going to try and see if you can see this. If you can't, I'm going to put a picture in. But all my seams on the inside is flat. There is absolutely no, look at all those seams. They are all just beautifully finished on the inside. You don't see any seams whatsoever. So all in all, this for me was quite successful. And I wanted to just share this with you to show you the flat locking that I've done. Remember, I'm into fashion sewing, so all my stuff that I am going to show you, all my tips and techniques, everything will always be revolving around me doing my fashion sewing, making my garments and all of that. Now we're going to do our last bit of tips and techniques on our overlocker today. So I'm going to go set up my overlocker and then I'll speak to you. Before I move on to working with a two thread, explaining how two thread overlocking works, I just want to lastly do gathering on the overlocker. Now I use it quite a bit, especially if I'm going to set in my sleeves. Instead of going to my sewing machine where I do my 2 rows of sewing on with the biggest, let's say the longest stitch length, and pulling it in, I now go and I do it on my overlocker. Now the only changes I need to do with my overlocker is basically my differential feet to a higher number And like on my sewing machine, I need to go to a longer stitch length. Now I go between 3 and 4. So at the moment I'm on 3.5 for this fabric that I'm working with. And remember the differential feet in the previous ones when we covered the differential feet, I can set it at a higher number, and then the front feed dogs will push in more fabric in the front than what's being pulled out at the back. And that is creating almost like a gathering effect for me. Now on knits it's perfect, it prevents the stretching. But on woven, I'm actually going to be gathering now. So all my settings are, let's go again, differential 2, stitch length 3.5. I've gone and left my settings on normal overlocking, and I've got my left needle in for a wide overlock stitch, or a wide 3-thread overlock stitch. And all I'm going to do, just to show you, and I'm going to move my machine just a little bit so I can get my hand in here. When I start sewing as well, I like to keep my finger just at the back. So I hope my hand's not in the way. I let the fabric basically push up against my finger. And when it comes out, I just grab the whole piece and I bring it across and I go thread. I go cut. Don't cut next to your fabric. Give yourself a little bit of thread left so that if it gathered in too much, I can go and I can smooth it out. Now, if we look at this, I'm just going to put it like this on my hand. Can you see it's only slight gathers? But imagine this now for my sleeve cap. That would have been perfect. And I can go and I can pull it in more, or I can almost take out a bit of the gathering. And the way that I can pull in a little bit more is if I go and I pick up, and I'm just going to show you here, I'll just pick up my needle thread. There we go. Let's just get that needle thread. Now I'm not grabbing that needle thread there. Let's see. And if I grab that needle thread, I can literally go, look at that, and I can pull in more. This is a really quick way. As I said, I use it for my sleeves wherever I need to gather in. But this is a quick way if you need to make a lot of gathers on something. If you're making cushions or you're making a frill for something, perfect way to go do it. But can you see how much I pulled it in? And again, when I'm putting a sleeve in and there's too much easing, I can go and move it and move out again. Now, if I want to, let's say I'm working with a long piece of fabric and I really need lots of gathers, and I've actually done it on tulle as well, and it gives you a beautiful gathering, I purposely go and throw out my needle tension. So I go higher. I want you to remember, the higher I go with my needle tension, the more gathers I'm going to get. So if I'm only going to go to about a 6, and I'm going to do 2 of them for you, I'm going to go 6 and I might go about 7.5. But if you do go higher, I want you to be sewing a little bit slower for me. Don't go full speed. You are going to break your needle. Remember, this thread is pulling very tight in my needle now. So I've got to be careful to not break a needle. So all I'm going to do with this, I'm just going to cut there. Can you see already how much, I'm trying to put it this way, I'm trying to see where you're going to see the best. Can you see how much it's actually gathered it in for me? So let's say I still want more, because it's a frill that I'm doing. So I'm going to go, let me go to about a 7.5. Yeah, I'm going to say really be cautious. The higher I go, the more chance I do have of breaking my needle, because I am throwing out my tension now to actually pull the fabric tighter for me while I'm gathering. Now let's go and do that one. I'm just going to maybe do it on this side, just so you can see the final effect if I go higher. And again, I like putting my finger there and it just pushes up. If it's a long piece and when there's a lot of fabric against my finger, I just lift my finger, release some of the fabric, and then put it back again. And I take it. Now, before I even carry on, I know I'm going to break a needle. I'm just quickly going back lower so I can just move my fabric out from under there. And look at the amount without doing any pulling in. Look at the amount that I've got there. Look at the amount there. This was my 6. And look at the difference. I'm trying to see what is going to be the best way to show. All right, and that was on my 7.5. Now, obviously, if we're doing clothing, I've got a seam allowance I've got to consider, so I cannot go and cut off. So when I'm doing my clothing, then I will work right on the edge. I've been cutting off now because it's easy in the demonstration, but obviously I would have not cut off anything. I would just guide the edge of my fabric right next to my blade. And if it looks like I've got a couple of loopers there, I'm not too worried about it because I'm pinning it in and then I'm going back and I'm sewing it in any case. So that is what I tend to do when I'm doing my gathering. It's been years and years since I've actually gathered on my sewing machine because this is just so much easier to do it. Now, the next step we are going to do, or the next stitch that I wanted to show, and I'm only going to show you one stitch. I'm going to do my changes now to work with 2 threads. Now, a lot of overlockers today is allowing a 2 thread sewing as well. And if you're looking at your 2 threads, all that we're going to do, we don't want to thread the top looper. We basically use our needle, either left or right, and we use the bottom looper. We bypass the top looper. Now, my machine has got a little loose looper converter, which I'm going to put on my machine. But a lot of your machines out there nowadays, and I'm talking now all the Beninas, all the newest Bonnettes, you've all got a converter that you can put on to convert the top looper so it won't interfere with my 2 thread sewing. Now let's have a look at my top looper. I've got to put this converter on, and it's got a little piece of wire, and that little piece of wire goes through the eye of my top looper. Now mine is, like I mentioned, a loose converter. A lot of your machines, you will have something that's actually connected to the top looper already, and you will just pull it out and flip it over and it converts it for you. I know some of the Elna machines are like that, the baby lockers like that. So just have a look. And if you don't have this option, speak to your dealer. I know on the Benina machines you can get, on the previous models, if you don't have the looper converter, you can order it from your dealer to actually be able to work your 2 thread. So just see, there is a lot of these things available now, and it's just making our sewing so much easier. So I'm trying to work from the side. I'm going to put it on, and I haven't done this wire yet. Can you see the wire? I'm going to push this wire and I'm putting it behind so that it goes through the eye of the looper. Just want to make sure. Can you see there? It's gone through there. And I want you to make sure, just with your tweezer, just lift it a little bit and make sure that you are going to, it's not going to lift up, then I know it's gone through. I've gone ahead and I just threaded my machine now for 2 thread overlocking, and I've done polyester thread in my left needle, and we're working now with our bottom looper. We're bypassing the top looper. I've gone ahead and I've actually done a decorative thread in my bottom looper. I love the wrapped overlock for decorative work. It almost gives me like a blanket stitch effect at the end of the day. Now, if you look at just working with my normal polyester, that is what the overlock looks like. I'm going to also show you in the picture so that you can see the difference. And look at a decorative thread where I've gone with a longer stitch length, and just look how beautiful it really gives me that effect of I would say a blanket stitch almost. Now, how the stitch is formed, because I've only got thread in the bottom looper, as I'm sewing this, I'm just going to put this there so you can follow along. The bottom looper moves at the bottom of the fabric. Okay, now because I've loosened it, my top looper grabs that thread and it brings it all the way and it wraps it to the top, and then my needle thread catches it over there. So it is literally one decorative thread and my needle thread that I'm using. So every stitch is going to be wrapping over and being stitched in place by my needle. So you've got to be aware that you're not going to go and sew full speed for me on this. You've got to sew slower so that my machine gets that chance to wrap all the time. So just be patient when you are sewing this, but it does give you a beautiful effect. Now, what I also want to show you, and I'm just going to let us zoom in a little bit. If you're looking at my looper converter and my thread there, look what's happening. As soon as my stitch is forming, I hope you can really see it clearly. But what happens, my bottom thread gets caught by my top looper. And because I've got the converter on there, you'll see your thread's not sliding all the way. I'm just trying to give you a good explanation. It's not sliding all the way over the top looper. So it's keeping it in the front of the top looper tip, that converter. And as I go across, now when it's in front of the needle can grab that thread, and you can see it's almost like a crocheting effect that it's giving me. So that is how the stitch is formed. It comes over the top looper, literally grabs it, brings it over to my needle catches the thread, and I can sew. So that is how we're going to do it. Now also, if we're looking at our fabric here where I've done it, basically look at that, and look at my photo that I'm also putting there for you. Look at what the stitch looks like. It is literally wrapped it across for me, and it's sewn it in place. Now I'm going to do it with my decorative thread, and if you go back to our previous video where we actually spoke about decorative threads, remember when I work with a decorative thread, I've got to first test it. I cannot go directly to my settings for my decorative stitch that I'm going to do. I've already gone and done a 3-thread overlock, normal overlock, to see what's the reaction of my thread. And I told you when I did my test in the previous video, I know with this thickness of thread, my machine wants to go 1.5 lower. Now let's look at what my settings will be. As I've mentioned, I'm not worried about needle thread. This is where my decorative thread is. This is the one that I will have to look at changing. Now the book says, my instruction book says 3.5. When I did my test on an overlock stitch with this thread, I knew that I had to loosen it by 1.5. So all I'm going to do, I'm loosening it by 1.5. And I know it's going to work that way because I've done my test. So if you're working with decorative threads as well, maybe make notes for yourself if you work with decorative threads in your overlocker, so that you know with this thread, it was 1.5, and I can just go ahead and I can go and so make it 1.5 less. If you're not too sure on this, please go look at our previous video where I did the flat locking and we worked with decorative threads. I talk you through setting in your overlocker for your decorative threads, and that's why I'm not covering it here again. You can just go back and have a look. Now, working with a thicker thread as well, remember, the thicker the thread, the longer the stitch is going to be. If I don't make a longer stitch, I am going to jam my machine. The thread is going to sit on top of each other, and I'm either going to break a needle or I'm jamming my machine. Now I've gone all the way to a 4 stitch length on my machine because this is really a thick thread. And now all I can do, and let's just put our blade back. I almost forgot to put my blade back. Let's just go needle up there. There we go. And I'm just going to do, if you want to with decorative thread as well, just give it a turn with the flywheel just to make sure nothing is pulling tight. It's just for the safety of your machine because of the thickness of the thread. I don't want to damage my machine. I didn't help my thread in the beginning. Can you see that I was trying to stay out of the picture, so I didn't want to put my hands there. So it felt like it would jam almost. So just make sure to guide your fabric at the end when you start with that thicker thread. And slow. Don't go fast. I really don't want to go fast. I'm just going to cut it there. And can you see there where I didn't hold onto my thread to just help it start? Look how it actually bundled there. And I could have jammed my machine there. And here is when I'm actually controlling my fabric. Look at that. Perfect stitch all the way around. And because I loosened my needle, my looper tension more, because that's what my test told me to do with my decorative thread, it wraps all the way across. If I had to leave it on the 3.5, and I'm just going to do a sample for you so you can see the wrong way. If I didn't adjust for my thread and I left it on my 3.5, can you see how it's pulled tight on my fabric? I want the stitch to be nice and relaxed. And like I mentioned, even though it's rolled it a little bit, it's tunneled a bit, you can find sometimes that it's just not giving me a nice, neat stitch on this side. So please go and make sure. Now, to do your samples on this, you can work with a decorative thread, and you can also go and try your other 2 thread stitches. Remember, we've got quite a bit. We've got our 2-thread rolled hem, we've got 2-thread flat locking as well that we can do, and then this, which is my favorite, is called the 2-thread wrapped overlock. I've actually covered everything that I wanted to cover with this basic overlocking tips and techniques with you. As I'm playing with my overlocker, I will also be sharing more and more tips with you. So in between all the other tips and techniques, we might go back to our overlocker. But for now, I've actually covered everything for you. Now, one other thing that I wanted to also just touch on is a couple of questions that I did receive. So one of the questions that I did receive was, how do I unpick my overlocker? To unpick your overlocker stitches, you've got to nip the needle threads every now or every here and there. And what you're going to do, you pull out the needle thread, and then you'll see that the loopers just come off. Don't go cut your loopers. If you're cutting the looper, you're going to sit with all these small little pieces of thread that you've literally got to try and get off your fabric. So don't go and do that. Now, I've already gone and just cut here and there on my fabric just to show you. And I'm just going to pick up a little bit of my stitches here, of my thread here, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to pull it out. And it literally just pulls out. It is so easy to get these stitches out. And now I've got that one that's just sitting there. Let me just lift it up a little bit more there. You've got to be careful. As I said, you don't want to be cutting the looper. You want to be cutting the needle thread and pulling on the needle thread. So as I'm pulling it out, can you see? And all that happens, my loopers just come off. All right, let's go and do another one just to show you. And that is really, you've just got to make sure you grab the needle thread and not cut your looper by accident. It's very quick or very easy to cut it. So I'm just going to, again, there's the one going, I'm just taking the other one. And if you look at that, I can literally just take my looper thread and it comes off. All right, so that's what you're going to do for me. I want you to also be aware, if you are going to cut your needle threads, make sure that you're not cutting the looper. If you look at the picture I'm showing you now, can you see where that needle thread is sitting? You're cutting between the two legs of the looper. If you're cutting between the looper stitches, and I'm going to show you there as well, and I think rather look at the photo. If you cut between the looper threads, you're actually cutting your looper thread and not the needle. It looks like it's a stitch, but it's actually not the stitch. The stitch for the needle is between those two little legs, and I just cut all of them over there, and just do it. You can do it in about pieces like this. I think that's comfortable to pull out. On my sample, I've done smaller pieces because I'm working with my small fabric, and just pull out that for me. And then you've got your long thread that's from the loopers, and you can just literally just take it off there. Now, that was the one question that I wanted to answer. Then I had another question come through, because when we did the decorative thread, I spoke about using metallic thread. The metallic thread that I spoke about that I use is the Glamour. Now, the Glamour from Madeira is a thick thread. It's basically the same thickness as this blue thread that I've worked with today. So even though it's metallic, it's not reacting like our thinner metallics. If we go and look at our embroidery metallics for our machines, this one is not going to react so good in my overlocker. I've never even thought of using it, but when the question came up, I thought, let me go play. Maybe it's possible. My machine doesn't like it. I did a rolled hem with it. Because of that slight filament that's that's basically, let's say, the inner core of your metallic, it doesn't work as nicely on my overlocker. It's too hard, the thread. It's sticking out here and there. I'm not getting a smoother, well, let's say a finish on it, and it's very scratchy on the skin as well. Remember, I'm looking at clothing that I'm going to be working with, and I found it quite scratchy on my skin. I did go and test it going lower, because metallic thread is usually slower speed, lower tensions, metallic needle. We're not going to put it in our needle here. Decorative work is through the loopers. I played with it a little bit, so I'm not going to recommend going for your normal metallic threads. There's beautiful embroidery threads out there, rayon threads, that actually almost looks like the metallic. So rather go and use that. It's going to give you a smooth, soft finish. So for me, that was a no-no. I didn't like it. I'll rather leave that to my sewing machine. But definitely, if you are in an area and you can get Madeira Glamour, go look at that metallics. It's beautiful. It's a soft thread. It's this thickness that I've worked with here and makes the most beautiful 2-thread wrapped overlock. So please go and have a look at that. That is basically everything now covered with you on your basic overlocking stitches. I want you now also to remember, and I always stress this to everybody that even comes to my classes, after I've done a project, please go clean your machine, check if it needs oil, and oil your machine as well. You can go and look at our previous video where I did it with Megan from Benina Technical Services, and we spoke about maintaining or maintenance on your overlocker between services, and she took you through all the steps of cleaning your machine, oiling your machine as well. I've put the link for that video in the box below, so just go and look for that video. And I think to actually just finish off this tips and techniques that we've done, please go and look at that video as well. Make sure that after every project you're going to clean. We are getting a lot of fluff buildup in our machines purely because we are cutting the fiber or our fabric, so all that fluff builds up there, and you don't want to leave it in there. Eventually your machine is really not going to look good, and it's not good for your machine either. So just keep it clean, keep it oiled, and then you will have a happy overlocker at the end of the day that's not going to give you problems. So please go and do that for me now. And I think, guys, that is it. We've done a lot of overlocking tips and techniques. It was 5 weeks of tips and techniques for you. So go take your overlocker now, go choose a project, go work with all these stitches that I've shown you, go do a roll them, try the wrapped overlock if you can with the 2-thread, and like my jacket behind me, please go do a flat lock. Now, as always, you can email me or you can leave comments for me below. I'm not always online, so when I do see your messages, I will definitely respond to it. And then I will see you again with our Friday's feature as well, where we're going to show you a new product. But until then, happy sewing.